Morning seeped through the Hindu Kush as the command tent breathed diesel and dust. In the valley, a SEAL element under Lieutenant Noah Carter slid into an L-shaped kill zone as PKM bursts chewed bark and an RPG ripped a trunk open. Ethan Cole went down hard, and a teammate hauled him behind a thin rock, while radios crackled and died in the narrow draw. Carter keyed for close air support from Bagram. An AH-64 Apache spinning up with an arrival in about 22 minutes as the clock started ticking inside my head. High on the West Ridge, Staff Sergeant Avery Clark of the Army National Guard lay in a hide at roughly 740 meters. The M2010 enhanced sniper rifle in .300 Winchester Magnum rested on a Harris bipod with a Leupold Mark 5 HD and an AAC suppressor ready. Elevation dope sat near 3.8 mil with a wind hold between 0.4 and 0.5 mil as a west wind pushed about 3.5 meters per second. Breath settled, finger light on the wall. And a quiet reminder returned that shooting without purpose is only expensive noise now. They moved single file through a narrow cut in the trees, spacing too tight at about 5 meters because the ground pinched them in. A PKM started hammering at roughly 650 to 750 rounds per minute, and an RPG-7 tore a cedar apart, showering bark and dirt across the creek bed. Ethan Cole took a hit high on the thigh, and a teammate dragged him behind a thin slab of rock, while everyone else hugged the earth and tried to find angles. Radios fought the slope and the thick canopy, voices stepping on each other as Lieutenant Noah Carter kept orders short and clean. No shouting, just enough to keep the line from breaking. Up on the West Ridge, Staff Sergeant Avery Clark lay inside a proper hide built with a ghillie net and natural brush, glassing through a spotting scope. The M2010 enhanced sniper rifle in .300 Winchester Magnum sat on a Harris bipod with a Leupold Mark 5 HD and an AAC suppressor, with range and data cards, spare batteries, an IFAK, and a day ration set within reach. Wind out of the west held near 3.5 meters per second, and the pre-range distance read about 740 meters. So, elevation sat at roughly 3.8 mil, with a wind hold between 0.4 and 0.5 mil. Breathing, even, and the trigger prepped. Avery set priorities on the RPG first, then the PKM team, and the scope closed the world to a quiet circle as the decision to intervene settled into place. The briefing started around 7:15 a.m., with pale light pressing through canvas, a generator humming, and a digital map glowing against the wall. Lieutenant Noah Carter, a Navy SEAL officer 03, traced a movement route along the creek bed to block a weapons convoy before midday. He identified checkpoints, timing windows, and a clean exfil path tied to terrain features and radio relays. His tone stayed clipped and calm as he assigned sectors and contingency triggers. Staff Sergeant Avery Clark, Army National Guard E6, was introduced as a temporary augmentation to the Special Operations Task Force with a precision overwatch role from the West Ridge. Her tasks were observation, precision fires when required, and guiding the team with timely information. She listened more than she spoke and built a mental picture from map contours, tree density, and likely fields of fire. She logged frequencies, call signs, and pre-planned grids in a small notebook kept flat on her knee. While Carter moved through risk factors, Avery quietly marked 2 choke points where the valley would funnel movement and shrink visibility. She noted that spacing should open to 10 to 15 meters in those segments and flagged the chance of comms degradation from slope and canopy. Chief Petty Officer Mike Donovan, SEAL E7, let a dry smile show the doubt of a veteran without breaking rank or respect. Avery closed her notebook, reviewed ranges and bearings, and stepped out into the morning to begin the West Ridge climb. Focused not on recognition, but on doing the right work when it would matter most. The edge of Missoula smelled like pine and cold metal in the early light, and that is where Avery Clark learned patience. Frank Hale took her out with a small .22 and showed her how to feel wind on the cheek before reading numbers. Every miss had to be explained with wind, distance, breathing, and then tried again with slower hands. The silence between shots taught her more than the crack of rimfire on a tin can. Her father, David Clark, had flown the A-10 over Iraq before an injury to his right arm after Fallujah changed his cockpit for good. He spoke about focus that outlasts pressure and the habit of building purpose before any squeeze of a trigger. At the kitchen table, he traced simple patterns of approach and escape that matched the way he once worked, holds and headings. Avery listened and learned to plan before she moved. By 17, she was shooting local precision matches, calm among men who watched her set up with steady hands. An Army marksmanship unit recruiter noticed the way she built positions and ran a stage without wasted motion. Fort Moore became a waypoint on a map that led into uniforms and longer ranges. Sniper school followed with range estimation, fieldcraft, stalking, and target engagement under pressure until the routine felt like air. She finished near the top without applause and carried home a single line that mattered to her. Shooting without purpose is just expensive noise, lived in the back of her mind and shaped how she worked. Precision turned into a way of moving when no one watched. A habit of logging dope carefully and checking wind twice. Breath, position, and intention settled into muscle memory that would later hold steady on a high ridge when the valley began to shake. She left before first light and followed the same route she had scouted 2 days earlier, moving in the gray that lives ahead of sunrise. A twisted pine marked the first turn, and a shard of pale rock caught the morning glow to confirm the second. Scree shifted under her boots as she climbed a broken rib of the west ridge, and she kept the line by linking small landmarks in her head. The air tasted of cold dust and sap, and the valley below stayed quiet. At the crest, she chose a knuckle of ground with a clean field of fire and natural shadow. She pulled a ghillie net from her pack and blended it with brush, leaving gaps for sight and air. Then carved a low-firing shelf without exposing fresh dirt. The muzzle would not kiss the soil, so there would be no dust signature. The M2010 enhanced sniper rifle and .300 Winchester Magnum settled onto a Harris bipod, and an AAC suppressor went on with a wrap to tame mirage off the hot can. Her kit sat arranged within reach, and nothing rattled. A spotting scope, range and data cards, spare batteries, an IFAK, and a day ration. She ran a quiet safety check and verified an empty chamber until it was time to load. She set parallax and focus for a sharp image through glass and confirmed her angles to the valley floor. The pre-range distance read about 740 meters, and her zero lived at 100. She dialed elevation to roughly 3.8 mil, which equals 38 clicks at a 10th mil per click. A west wind pushed near 3.5 meters per second, so she planned a hold between 0.4 and 0.5 mil. She wrote the wind calls on the card and verified them again through the spotting scope. Then she slid behind the Leupold Mark 5 HD, found a stable forearm support, eased pressure onto the trigger wall, slowed her breathing, and reminded herself that a shot only mattered if the purpose was clear. Sunlight slid across the opposite slope and caught a quick glint that did not belong there, while a patch of brush sat unnaturally still against a moving wind. The first PKM burst ripped across the draw at roughly 650 to 750 rounds per minute, and an RPG-7 came up on a shoulder to lock the lane. The team under Lieutenant Noah Carter broke formation in the choke as bark and dust filled the air. A teammate hauled Ethan Cole by his kit into the shadow of a thin rock, while others flattened and searched for angles that would not get them cut. The terrain pinched radios into static and overlap, and the canopy damped range and clarity. Carter kept commands short and clean, so the net did not drown itself. Rifles shifted to short controlled bursts to manage exposure and conserve ammo until movement opened. Contact stayed close and hard, and every second felt borrowed. On the West Ridge, Staff Sergeant Avery Clark settled deeper into the hide and pushed the PTT once with a calm breath. Overwatch on West Ridge. Eyes on 3 positions. Engaging flowed across the net as a simple fact. She verified dope for about 740 meters, with elevation near 3.8 mil and a wind hold between 0.4 and 0.5 mil for a west wind near 3.5 meters per second. Focus and parallax were checked until edges looked clean through the Leupold Mark 5 HD, and the Harris bipod bit into the ground just enough to hold without skip. Carter reached higher for help and called an AH-64 Apache out of Bagram with an arrival in about 22 minutes. A number that sat heavy but workable. Clark set priorities to drop the RPG first, and then the PKM gun team. Breathing even. Pressure straight to the wall. The valley pulled tight inside the scope, and the world narrowed to wind. Hold. And purpose as she prepared to fire. The rifle settled into the terrain like a tool made for this ridge. The M2010 and 300 Winchester Magnum rode the Harris bipod. The Leupold Mark 5 HD held a clear image. And the AAC suppressor wore a wrap to keep mirage in check. Zero sat at 100 meters, and the dial showed 3.8 mil of elevation, which equals 38 clicks at a 10th mil per click. A west wind near 3.5 meters per second called for a hold between 0.4 and 0.5 mil. The first shot broke on the RPG gunner as he pivoted toward the lane. Breath out. Pressure through the wall. A soft thump. And the man folded at the high chest. The bolt lifted and slid back with no wasted motion as brass flicked aside. She held again for wind and watched the loader reach for the tube. Then sent the second round with a lead near 0.7 mil to meet his movement. She paused to scan through the glass, while the suppressor wrap kept heat shimmer from warping the picture. Focus and parallax were nudged until edges looked true. Down in the draw, the team returned fire in short controlled bursts that clipped the chaos into rhythm. Smoke hissed to cover Ethan Cole while two shooters shifted to better angles. Avery keyed the net with a simple update that carried more calm than volume. Overwatch West Ridge. 2 RPG down. She marked a PKM team dragging their gun toward a gap on the south side. Elevation was already right, so she held 0.5 mil for wind and pressed until the trigger broke clean. The gunner fell before the bipod bit and the assistant grabbed for the belt. She cycled and sent the next round center mass. Then watched the weapon stop moving. Another quick sweep of the ridge showed a spotter crouched with a small radio and waving an arm toward unseen fighters. The hold stayed at 0.5 mil, and the reticle met him under the collarbone. Heat built, and she managed it with tempo. A few seconds to breathe. A slight lift of the cheek from the stock. And the image steadied again. She rolled the focus ring a quarter and read the air in the thin shimmer above a rock line. The next target broke from cover at a lateral run, and she took him with a lead near 0.8 mil. On the valley floor, Lieutenant Noah Carter adjusted spacing to 10 to 15 meters as the team began to slide out of the beaten zone. Nobody sprayed. Every burst came short and deliberate, while one man kept eyes on Cole and another checked sectors. The fight turned from panic to a plan as the ridge fire thinned. Avery updated the net again in the same measured tone. PKM South Ridge neutralized. Overwatch continues. Continue to cover Cole. She kept counting impacts as observed effects rather than claims, and let that discipline guide the pace. Each shot came with the same sequence of breath. Hold. And follow through. Brass ticked against stone and settled into dust. 5 minutes felt like a long-held breath. By the end, she had 9 observed neutralizations, and the hillside finally stopped spitting back. She watched longer than comfort demanded, and only then eased the bolt to the rear to check the chamber. The scope picture widened from crosshair to ridgeline, and the valley sounded like wind again. She keyed the net one more time with a quiet report. West Ridge is quiet, and Overwatch is set. Her breathing fell into an easy cadence, while the team below consolidated and checked gear. She let the seconds pass toward the moment when help would arrive on station at 9:17 a.m., and kept her purpose fixed in that circle of glass. The gunship arrived on station at 9:17 a.m. Blades thumping in a heavy cadence that rolled over the ridge. The sound came first. Then the sight of an AH-64 Apache sliding along the contour with quiet menace. Short bursts from the M230 30mm chain gun stitched the far slope with deliberate rhythm. Muzzle flashes winked and died where the enemy had tried to hold. Staff Sergeant Avery Clark stayed behind glass and kept scanning through the Leupold Mark 5 HD. No fresh muzzle flash. No movement. Only heat haze drifting off broken rock. She eased the bolt to the rear and cleared the chamber, then checked the area once more for any sign of a holdout. A calm update went out on the net that the West Ridge was quiet and overwatch set. Lieutenant Noah Carter pulled the team together and ran a quick consolidate and reorg while the valley settled. A medic checked Ethan Cole and prepped him for movement. Carter gathered a short ACE report on ammo, casualties, and equipment and confirmed the exfil route they had already mapped. The others held sectors and kept fire discipline while the last echoes faded. Dust and splinters fell in slow motion from shredded bark, and the radios lost their crowded edge. The Apache banked away to the south, and the air felt wider again. Clark recommended moving out along the briefed path and keeping eyes high until the draw opened. The team began to lift from cover in a measured rhythm and slipped away from the beaten zone. The operations room hummed under tired fluorescent lights and smelled like dust, coffee, and dried sweat. Boots scuffed plywood, radios whispered, and paper maps curled at the corners as the day lost its sharp edges. Lieutenant Noah Carter stepped in with helmet under his arm and dirt on his face, calm in the way people are after the storm. He met Staff Sergeant Avery Clark with a steady look and acknowledged that her overwatch had kept his team alive. A short statement delivered with Navy to Army respect and nothing more. Chief Petty Officer Mike Donovan followed with his right arm in a sling and the swagger gone quiet. He pressed an old challenge coin into Avery's palm and left it there as a simple marker between people who do hard work without a stage. No one clapped and no one tried to make a speech. The room accepted what had happened and returned to low voices and the slow work of logging the day. Outside, the air cut cold against the skin and the mountains held their dark lines. A distant rotor faded to a memory, and the base settled back into generators and footsteps. Avery stood for a moment and let her breathing match the night. The lesson felt clean in the quiet. That discipline and purpose mattered more than any medal, and that a good day was one where everyone came home and the heart rested easy. Heat lay thick over the Fort Moore range in the late afternoon. Staff Sergeant Avery Clark walked the firing line where soldiers worked with the M2010 A1 SDMR. She tapped an elbow here, a shoulder there, and coached a slower breath until the reticle settled. Brass kissed the dirt with soft notes while targets at 400 meters waited. She spoke in a calm voice over the Georgia hum. Make the trigger break like glass. Let the stock settle in the pocket. One shooter trimmed his support hand and the next eased his cheek weld, and the groups began to tighten in a steady rhythm. Clark moved behind each scope, nudged magnification and diopter, checked eye relief, and told them to run short controlled strings instead of chasing misses. Between volleys, she watched for safe muzzles and clear benches, then had each rifle locked open for a quick chamber check before stands went cold. In her head, the old line returned. Shooting without purpose is just expensive noise. And she passed it on as patience rather than lecture. The sun slipped low, and a warm wind lifted paper as targets fluttered at the berm. Clark stood for one quiet beat, knowing precision was a way to live when no one was looking. And tomorrow, these soldiers would shoot a little better. What this story leaves behind is simple and strong. Discipline and purpose win over noise, especially when no one is watching. And that truth carried Staff Sergeant Avery Clark from a cold ridge to a quiet range. Respect across services matters because every skill has a day when it saves a life. And the teamwork between an Army Guard sniper and a Navy SEAL unit proved how trust turns fear into action. Real power often moves in silence, showing up, doing the right work, and letting results speak while the world looks elsewhere. If this moved you, drop the word dope in the comments to suggest real tactics and real gear topics you want next. Subscribe and share if you want more stories that balance heart with accuracy. Purpose before pressure is the promise we take forward. A way to work and live that keeps the hands steady when the moment arrives.